Okay, everyone, welcome back. And today we're going to talk about Redux, which is something that we need to install and implement in our code if we want to have a smooth and connected, basically, components which are talking to each other, or rather, they're talking to a centralized store where we keep the state, a selected state of each component. And so every other component can take a peek and see what's going on in a different component, or maybe one component can change a store in a way that it's going to change another component. So it's going to update another component without messy solutions such as the one that I showed you the last time. Redux is something that I just need to use for, any type of store is something that I need to use with React, because it's nice to have React implemented just because it's so efficient and smooth and quick at the end of the day when you implement it well. But data management is not perfect in React, and it wasn't supposed to be. React's job is to separate certain aspects of web development, and it does it very well. It doesn't want to manage your data in a way that Redux will allow us. So anyway, I don't want to talk much about Redux itself. It's something that took me a short while to understand what it does, where it came from, what exactly I can use it for. And I'm not going to talk about that, but I do recommend Traversy Media. Brad Traversy is a fantastic YouTuber who taught me all this stuff, by the way. He taught me React and Redux. So whatever I'm teaching you comes from this guy. And I recommend this Redux crash course that takes about an hour. And it gives you a nice foundation of what Redux is. But to be honest, right now, I think you don't really need that. If you just want to push forward, you just want to build a portfolio that is working well, and you kind of know where to go to do certain things and where to share the data and whatnot, you don't need to do that crash course. I'm going to try to explain what's going on today. But if you want to know more about Redux, go ahead and check that video. So first step, and again, I'm going to follow Brad Traversy's steps. So one thing that he taught me was using the DevTools, Redux tools for, and in my case it's Chrome. I don't know if they make anything for anything else, but if you go and just click in here, if I didn't have that plugin installed, it just says install or something, and all I had to do is click and go here and pin Redux DevTools to my bar. So that is pretty easy. Let me go back here. And so the next step will be installing Redux and all the different npm packages that we need for using Redux. So let's go ahead and type npm install I Redux and React Redux. So it's something that helps Redux to work with React, because Redux is not built for React only. It was built before, I think, React, and it helps moving around data in other JavaScript packages and libraries and setups, basically. We're going to install something called Redux func. Don't worry about that. It's just something that we need to have to make our setup work. And the last bit will be Redux. At redux-devtools/extension, and one more is Axios. That's the last one. Okay, so as I said, we need Redux itself, then we need something that will help work in React with Redux. Redux func is something that basically we use for actions in Redux, and you'll see what I mean by actions in the future. As I said, don't worry about that. It's just a line of code that we need to add, and we're sorted, and it's going to help us to simplify our code. This one is obviously for the DevTools that allows you to use our setup, our project with the DevTools that we just installed in Chrome. And Axios is a library that we use for making calls to our backend. So basically, it's like an Ajax library, just like we used with jQuery. We just did like jQuery.get or post. We're going to use Axios from now on. Okay, so let's hit enter. It seems like we found 0 vulnerabilities, so it's looking good. Now let's start implementing our code. So in front end, open source, that's where we keep our React stuff. And in here, I'm going to create something called store, and it's going to be a JavaScript file and I'll just call it store. Here it is. And again, to make things easier, I created snippets that I'm going to just paste and explain what they are. But I'm putting a little bit more effort now, so I'll create the files one by one. And so let me see, what do we have here? We have create store and apply middleware, and we take that from Redux, and you'll see in a second where it's being used. Then we have compose with DevTools. So that's how we connect with DevTools in module not installed. That is strange because I did install it here. So we'll see in a second if it works or not, but I'm pretty sure it should be working. We'll see in a second. Then we are importing func from Redux func, and we are importing our reducers. And in a second, you'll see what I mean by reducers. We don't have that yet. As you can see, it's highlighted, and PyCharm is saying that it cannot be resolved because we don't have a reducers folder, just like components here. And this is something that I really like in React and in Node, basically. When you say import name from reducers, just a folder, it's like a package. So you need, when you have Python, you need that init file, that init.py file that is kind of saying, yeah, this is a Python package. To use in Node, you want to use index.js file. We're going to create a reducers folder, and inside of that, there's going to be index.js that will put together all the stuff that we have in that folder. So we can split that, organize it, and then put everything together in index.js. Okay, and in here we specify what will be the initial state of our store. And I know we were talking about state the last time, and so just so you know, state the last time that we were talking about in relation to React is something slightly different, or yeah, it is slightly different because we're still talking about certain state, which is kept in an object. So it's similar. It is different because we're not talking about the same thing. We're talking about store's state in here. So the overall Redux store state, okay? And this is the initial state. Right now we're saying there's nothing to look at, there's no data, but if you want to initialize your app with certain state, this is where you do it. Then we say use middleware, and that's going to be our func, which will help us with the actions, functions, and whatnots. So just that one line helps us with the whole setup. And in here, we just say, hey, create a store, and we're going to use that store in our components. And we just say, okay, use that root reducer. So that's going to be our reducers, and I'll tell you a little bit about reducers in a second. Then we say what is the initial state, and then we just say, hey, could you add this with DevTools, basically. So use DevTools to basically help with development and send the information to DevTools from that store, and you'll see how that's done. That's it. So I suppose let's keep an eye on this. We want to make sure that we have that index.js in reducers, so that is not highlighted anymore. I'm still worried about this, but we'll see if it works. If not, we can install it separately in a second. So now, before we go and create reducers, I want to start with actions, because basically I'm going to start with a bit of a summary of how Redux is working. Action is pretty straightforward. There is nothing complicated about an action. You probably know what action is just by the sound of it. When you get something, when you post something, when you delete something, that's an action. When you do some stuff, when there is an action happening, we write a function where the specified function is happening, and then it sends a signal, and that signal is intercepted by reducers. Okay, so just keep in mind these two things. There's an action, and action is straightforward. That reducer might be like, what is the reducer? Why is it called that way? And what does it do? Why doesn't action do the whole job? So for example, imagine you have 5 different actions that should end up in pretty much the same thing. Let's say we create an object, we delete the object or update the object. At the end, we want a message saying this certain object, and we get that object back from the backend in the message when it's being created or changed or whatever. And we just say this object has been, and then we just say an action. So we can have one reducer that makes that message that at the end just like puts in the store a message saying, hey, this is what happened. And we don't, and that's it. So there's that connection between action and reducer, and reducers basically are updating the store. Okay, so action is just an action, and it just says, okay, I'm finished, and here is the message that I'm sending of certain type, and you'll see what I mean by types in a second. And reducers are like, okay, I'm a reducer that is reacting to a message of type create object, and a message was sent and the type was get object. So I'm doing nothing. But then someone creates an object and I'm like, oh, create object. Okay, give me all that data that you came to me, that you sent that message with, and I'm going to change that store, our Redux store, to reflect that action, that change that happened in our app. It doesn't have to be the database, it could be many other things. We're going to start with the database, but whatever you want to do, you can do in that store. Okay, so that's why I want to start with an action, because it's like a first step in the data flow in Redux. So now, since we have air pollution here, I'm going to use a country as our example. So we're going to have get and update, create and delete for country, just as an example. We actually don't need that, but I just want to have something established, an example that we can then copy and paste if you want to get one of those three functions. So let's go ahead and create an action in our source. So in source, we need to actually start with a file called types before we go to actions. So in actions, so that's going to be in a folder called actions, but we need types, JavaScript file, and that's just for housekeeping, that's just for keeping stuff neat. And we're gonna export const get countries, and that's gonna just keep a string of the same name. Okay, and it's just for good housekeeping. That's it. You'll see I'm gonna use that in our actions file, which is called, we're gonna call it every, the way I organize my actions is by apps. So if I work on air pollution, I wanna have air pollution JS for air pollution actions. That's it. Air pollution here, and I have my snippet for this, and I'm just working on get request right now. So as you can see, we have our get countries from types. That's why I wanted to have it here. And the reason, so right now it's not that useful. We could just hard code it here. But the thing is, then in reducers, I'm going to tap into those types, action/types JS, and I'm going to use those names. So there's one source of those types. Okay, but let's start from the top. First, we get Axios from Axios. As I said, it's for the Ajax calls. So basically, JavaScript doing a call to an endpoint, basically. It doesn't have to be our backend, it doesn't have to be our Django. It could be any endpoint in the world. Here we have our type. So we just want to have a type of a message that we then dispatch, okay? And here is our first action. And I put a nice header here, get countries, because at some point you'll have like 10 or even 20 actions per app. So it's nice to see those big letters saying this is for countries, get countries. Anyway, and that's the name. So you have your operation here. We're getting something. And here we're getting countries, not one country, we get a list of countries. And in here we're using a arrow function. If you're new to JavaScript, then it might look a little bit weird. What happens here is we create a function. So this is like a notation that you use for creating a function and assigning it to get countries. But that function actually is built of another function. So it's a nested function that takes dispatch and gets state, okay? And when I was looking at that for the first time, I felt a little bit intimidated. I felt like, okay, this is not making a lot of sense to me. Why? Where is this dispatch coming from? Where is this get state coming from? So we can now either spend time on understanding where is it coming from or just soldier on. And that's what I did. And that's what get me where I am. So I think it's a bit of a, trade-off when you want to learn new stuff. Sometimes you just have to say, okay, this is overwhelming. I don't get it. But it seems like the pattern is easy. All I have to do is follow this pattern that I don't fully understand and keep going, because I want to keep going. And when I feel confident with the rest, with the basics, I'm going to start asking those difficult questions. Why is it built this way? How is it working? Where is this dispatch coming from? And so on. So for now, just remember that's the pattern that we follow. Every time you'll see there's going to be an arrow notation that follows by arrow notation with like some arguments in it, and inside you have your action. And in our case, it's going to be a Axios call, okay? And it could be anything. Like this action will be used in the future in your component. So once you call it, whatever you say in here is going to happen. It could be just a console log. It could be an alert. It could be anything that you want. But in here, we want to talk to our backend using Axios. So here we have our get, and we go to API air pollution country, and we know this this endpoint. Let me just go there actually. So let's go to localhost and add that here, and we get the list of our countries. If we did an actual curl request in our terminal, we wouldn't have that nice page. All we get is that list from here. Okay, it's going to be very raw answer. So let me just go here, and then we have then. So first we chain, basically in here we chain a couple of things. First we get, right, and that dot here relates to this place. So we chain after get, we say then. Once you get a success, do this. Okay, sorry, all this is this kind of success. And in here, in case something goes wrong, catch an error. Okay, and in our case today, we're gonna just console log it in case we get any errors. But basically, just keep in mind, this is not that crazy. This is a very simple thing happening, which is we get Axios and we say, hey, get from that Axios dot get an our endpoint. Okay, but then do this. And in case something goes wrong, catch that error. So we just chain something in here, chain a couple of operations. Okay, and so let's focus on then. So what happens is we get some response. In our case, it's going to be a list object in JSON of countries. So that's going to be a JavaScript object that we do something with. Again, this is a arrow notation for building a function. So all we want to do is dispatch a message in this case. And that's what I was talking about. An action does something, it does something significant. It goes to the backend and it says, hey, could you give me a country? For now, we don't need any authentication, so it doesn't add any authentication token. And it says, okay, if it's done, if you give me 200, status 200, so all good, successful, they dispatch a message. That's all I want to do. I got the response. I want to give you the data in my message. So my message is going to be that list of countries, and I want to just say, shout out loud, hey, get countries. I did get countries. And if there is a reducer that reacts to get countries, please do something with that data. Okay, that's it. That's how actions work. Right, so let's go and build a reducer. So let's go to source again and create a new folder. So I'm going to just create a file, but in a folder called reducers/index.js will be added automatically because I'm using JavaScript here. Okay, reducers/index, and that's the stuff that I was talking about. We need that index here, and you can see highlighting is gone. So basically, we need that index so we can say, hey, this is the name that I'm going to use for this. I could call it hello Marek, and just as long as I use hello Marek here, right? And we need to make sure that we export something from this index, obviously. And what's going to happen is, and I have my snippet here, so we do it a little bit faster. First, we get something called combine reducers. And that should tell you a lot about what this index.js is doing. It combines all the reducers. Housekeeping. You have different files for different apps. So you'll have air pollution, my finances, but if you have 20 apps, you'll have 20 files, and you don't have to sift through tons of code. You just have every app handled in a single file, but then we combine all of those in here. And as you can see, I'm trying to get air pollution from air pollution directory, and I'm not doing it yet because it doesn't exist. But then if I had that air pollution, I'll just put it in here, put a comma here, and once I get another app, I import it here and I add it here. And that's how I combine all of those reducers. Then I export it, and that's how I get it here. And that's what ends up in here, and then I put it in the store, create store, right? So let me then create a air pollution. Oh, sorry, I said directory, I meant file. So in here, that's going to be a file, not directory. So let's go here, reducers, new JavaScript file, and let's call it air pollution JS. And as you can see, there should be one-to-one between actions and reducers. That's just good housekeeping. That's how I like to keep it. If there are actions in air pollution, in air pollution JS, I want to have reducer that is also called air pollution JS that will catch all the messages sent by air pollution. And that's what we are going to do here. So let's have a look here. Everything seems fine. Now it's not highlighted, so it found air pollution file. And we, as you can see, we don't add JS in here. And then we just pass it here. Okay, so air pollution JS, reducer/air pollution JS. Let me grab my snippet. Boom. Okay, so as I said before, we get types from action/types.js. Okay, housekeeping, good practice. Then we have initial state, countries, and we say at the beginning we need to have something in there. We can't just say, hey, components, you're going to render a list here, an array, and but I don't have anything for you. So try map nothing, and it's gonna crash because, you know, if you have like undefined or null, you can't just do .map. So it's good to say initial state is nothing. So even if I say in the component, hey, try to map through it or whatever, render it, it's gonna just take an empty list and say, well, there was nothing in there, but I tried, and that's fine. Okay. But then with each of these reducers, and sorry, actually there is just one reducer here, and we switch between cases, right? So we're going to add cases into this one function, okay? And as you can see here, so let's start from the beginning. Export default, obviously, function, and we just, so we don't even name it because we just export it, right? So it ends up here and in here, right? So we just say, hey, we need a state and we need an action, okay? And by default, we say an initial state will be our state, but then in the future, we're going to get that state changed. And then actions are being dispatched, those messages basically from actions, and we check their types, just like we said in here. So we set it to get countries. So we are trying to intercept that type. So we just put a switch, we check the type of an action, and we say, hey, in case the type is get countries, and we get that from here. So it's basically string like this. Do that. Once you get countries in the type, do this, okay? And return, by return, we say, hey, update this state using my state from only this reducer that also has its own initial state. So we kind of like add to this initial state here. We don't have to specify what countries we get, but we need to specify it here in different apps, which in my opinion is a brilliant way of doing stuff. You don't want to have like one centralized file that controls everything. So anyway, and what we do is we say, hey, return an object. As you can see here, we're returning an object. And first we say, hey, whatever is the current state of the app, unpack it here. So ... is unpacking an object. So if you have any JavaScript object, you can just say ... state, and it's going to kind of like fill in key values inside of this object, right? Then we say comma, so whatever we had there is here, and then we can update stuff. So although there was countries in that state and we did unpack it, now with the second line we can update it. And all we say is, hey, in countries, we just want to get the payload from that action. Payload is the response.data. So that's going to be the list of our countries. We want to put it into countries, and that's it. We returned that new state, and that's what happens. By default, nothing changes. All we do is like, hey, there was a state and we just return that state and that's it. We don't change anything. Okay, so let's try to see it. And by the way, I know we did play around with our App.js file, but that's not going to be our App.js anymore because let me open it and tell you, show you what I mean. This is not an app. This is just me playing around with code and explaining certain elements of React. Let me just create a directory here and I'm going to call it sample. Okay, and I'm going to just copy this into sample and call it sample and maybe all components. Well, no, we just want to export default all components. And actually, I don't have to even make it so nice because that's just for examples. So let me get rid of, let's see if I can just delete all this crap here. Including this, that's going to be our app. We're not using any effects here. We can actually change this to component and fragment. Okay, and instead of react.component, we can have a component here. All of this was deleted by me just a second ago. That can be a fragment, so it just looks a little bit nicer, and then we render an app. Okay, so by default, this is how we set up React, and we grab something with an ID of app in our HTML, and we plug in this app, which is here, which right now does absolutely nothing, but we're going to add some new stuff. So in that app, we need to prepare it for using Redux. Okay, and let me just check my notes again. Create reducers here. So let me just copy my two imports. So we need to import two things. We need to import provider from React Redux. That's why we install this. and it's going to help us with providing the Redux setup in our React app. And then we need our store from here. So we get this store and we put it into app. And why are we doing this? Because we want to render. So let me just get rid of this fragment here, and we're gonna add provider, and automatically it's asking me for the store, and we're gonna add our store, this one here, and it goes here, right? So close, and everything needs to be wrapped in this provider, okay? And in here we're gonna have a fragment of whatever code. I don't know if we need that, but I don't think there is any harm keeping a fragment inside, and we're gonna add anything that we want to add into our app here, okay? And I want to have a component that I can put in here, and it's not going to be our sample. We're going to create a new component, so new JavaScript file, and in air pollution folder directory, we want to create something called CountryList. And the way I name my components is I usually just like stick to the model if it's around any model, and then the operation. So country and list all the countries here. Okay, and again, I have my snippet here. Let me paste it and have a look from the top. Obviously, component fragment, that's the typical import. Connect, that's new, and we are going to use it for connecting our component to Redux, so we can use the store and update the store. Prop types, that's something that we installed way back. It's just for, again, housekeeping. You don't need to use it, but it's a good practice, and it keeps your data tidy and keeps check on you, because we make mistakes, and sometimes we send some data that is wrong, or maybe we tap into a wrong endpoint and we get something that shouldn't be there. So by using prop types, we just say, hey, if you have countries, it's going to be an array. If we have a function that we're going to use, that's going to be a function. And so if you see something else there in console, you're going to get an error. So that's just useful. And now I'm going to import get countries from our actions. So this function is being imported into my component, and then we have the component itself. So we extend component, setting the prop types. So as you can see, we don't have any state of this component, so that's why you don't see state blah blah blah. We started with the prop types in here, but if you had any state, you would put that above prop types. And as you can see here, we have prop types, an array, and by the way, I'm missing something, and I'm missing the get countries, and that's going to be prop types dot func dot is required, because we need that. Without it, the code won't work. So we need something inside of get countries, and what those prop types are about. So what are we talking exactly? What get countries? What countries? Is it the state of this component? Is it the state of the Redux thingies? It's actually the props that we make for this component. Hear me out. So this is standard stuff, so I'm not going to talk about this. This is just a component that I built. Maybe I'll talk about this part here, but just in a second. I want to focus on the prop types, which are just for housekeeping, but that's the main part, okay? You probably saw something like export, default, and just the name of the class, right? We would just put that CountryList here, not this whole connect mambo jumbo. So what is going on here? So first we need to create a function that takes some state. And obviously you don't have to call it state, you can call it ABC, but as long as you put ABC here. But we call it state because it is managing certain state inside of this connect function, okay? We don't take it from anywhere. We actually connect knows where to go to get the state, and by state we mean the store state, okay? So it's gonna go to the store and look for air pollution because that's where we have our countries, and then it's gonna say countries, okay? So first we need to say, hey, using that state, return an object. So as you can see, we are not using return in here. So if you have an arrow and just like to something, to an object, which is in parentheses, but at the end of the day, it's just an object inside of those parentheses. So this is a shortcut to just return this. We don't need to put curly braces and then return. It's just quicker that way. So all I'm saying is, hey, could you return countries, this object, which has one key value pair, which is countries, and it's going to just take from the state of the store dot air pollution dot countries. So this value here, which is, by the way, updated when we call the get countries function. I mean, if we have the message as part of get countries type. And then use this to connect whatever data we want to connect. So we are connecting props. We are tapping into props of this component of CountryList. As you might remember, we were talking about state and props of each component. The state is something that we use for like switches and whatever is happening. When you type in text, you can change the state of the component. And then props is something that we kind of send down from the parent, okay? And that's all we knew about state and props. Now we are using props in a new and cool way where we inject our data from store using this connect thing. So we're saying, hey, inject to props whatever I specify here. So there's going to be something called this.props.countries, and that's going to be this list. And also add this dispatch action, and that's going to be, again, available through this.props.getCountries. And then add it to CountryList component. And that's it. So all we are saying is we want to use props in a new way, on a new level. It's not just passing information from the parent to the child. Now we are passing stuff from like the centralized store, and whatever we want to get from there, we just say, hey, give me that specific data from there because that's all I care about. And I want to use it in my component. And by the way, when it gets updated from another component, like let's say delete or add country, that list will be changed and this whole component will re-render with new data. So that's the power of using Redux. And once we get that, we can do something like this. This.props.countries, although we didn't pass it through parent, we have an access to countries. And then we map it. That's a JavaScript thing. You just create, and here is a arrow function. Go through those countries, so object by object like this, and in that country we call it country. Each object will be called country, and we tap into ISO code, and we need to use a key whenever you go through a list of things in React. You need to give it a key because React needs to know which one is which. Okay, so you give it something that is unique. In this case, it's going to be an ISO code. This is our PK, by the way. And then we say, hey, give us a so here is an ISO code. So that's going to be an ISO code here, and then we have a name, so give us country and name, okay? So all we have to do now is add that to our app. So import CountryList from, and PyCharm is helping me, so we need to go to air pollution, CountryList, and let's add that here. CountryList, we're not passing anything in, a bit of styling, and boom, that should work. Let's give it a go. So let's go down cd front end and npm run dev. Cool, successful. Let's see if it works. So what was I think it was React, right? So let's go /React and see what happens. Boom, we have our country list. We got it from here, from all that setup, from Redux. That's pretty cool, isn't it? All we do here in our CountryList component, we say, hey, there's going to be a header, and then there's going to be a table. And that table will have those two headers, and it's going to have that data coming from countries that came from here. That, oh, sorry, so I didn't mention the component did mount. This is important. We wouldn't get that if I put a comment here, save, and see that successfully built. No data. There's no data. The reducer can see that, okay, here is an empty list, so go ahead and iterate through it. But now we are tapping into the component's lifecycle, and we say, hey, I have this cool dispatch action here available to me in props. I want to use it. I want to call this action, and this action is being called. It goes to API air pollution country, and then it gets some result, and it dispatches that result using that type and the data from that call. If I actually, by the way, yeah, so let me just go and do, first I'm gonna make it pretty, and then console log and just that response, right? I just want to see what was the data back. Let me save this and see everything went well. Refresh, seems right. Let me see in console. Here's an object that was console logged, and I can see the result, the response, and that's the data that we got. So if you want to debug, go ahead and check what's going on. As you can see, status, it's 200. If I went, by the way, let me, and I did country, save, and try again, refresh, 404, didn't work. So we didn't, and if we go here, that's the console log error. So we were logging that error here, and that was code 404. So it's pretty cool. Let me just delete that here. delete that here so we don't have any weird logs. Refresh, all works well. And let's have a look here. Redux, tell me what is going on, Redux, because that's why I installed it. And here we have all the data that we got that we have in our store. For now, all we have is this air pollution because we have air pollution reducer, and we have the countries that are inside of that reducer. So here, boom, that's it. And in a second, we're going to create an add and delete functionality, and you'll see a history of actions in here, and you'll see how it changes, so you can inspect what's going on and develop your program even better, even easier, because you can see exactly what's going on. At some point, your app becomes so complex, you start losing sight of everything, and this is going to help a lot. Okay, so let's maybe apply those two add country and delete country just to practice and see how it looks. Let's go to types, and we need two more types. So let me just replace it with my snippet. We're going to have add country, delete country. I like to keep stuff in alphabetical order. So that's our types. Then we need to change the action. So again, I'm going to just go ahead and replace whatever we have in actions with the new ones. So basically what I did here is added add country and delete country from types, and we use them here. So again, add is at the beginning, then we have delete because D, and then G is last. So get countries is at the end. This is something that we looked at before. This is the new stuff here. So if you want to add country, you need to post something. And as you can see here, get country doesn't need any input here. So we don't need to bind it to any information. We just get whatever we have available. In here, we need to send some data, and you'll see how we send that data. But for now, just know that in action, you need to add that here. That data that we then send as our form data, basically to save it in our database. And then we post. Instead of get, we post, obviously. We go to API air pollution country. So that's our endpoint that we used before. And we send that information about our country that we want to save. And the same story here. If everything went well, dispatch this message with the add country type and with the data that came back from my call, which holds the data of the new country. Otherwise, just catch an error, right? In delete, very similar. We just have to specify the PK. So if it's ID, it's ID. If it's PK, it's PK. ISO code is in case of the country, we use ISO code. And then we go and delete using the Axios.delete. APA, blah, blah, blah. Here's our PK, which is ISO code in our case. And then we dispatch this message, delete country, and the code, the ISO code. So the PK of an object that was deleted. If something went wrong, again, we catch it. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Index, we don't change index because we still work inside of air pollution reducers. So let's just add those new reducers here. Going to my snippet. I'm being lazy, but also I think I'm saving some of your time, and I'm very conscious about your precious time. So I'm trying to kind of compromise between efficiency and speed. Cool. So again, adding new types, the same types that we use in actions. You know the connection. Initial state is the same. We don't want any different initial state. And now we have different interceptors. I call them interceptors. I don't know what is the exact name for it, but it kind of makes sense. When you send a message, you want to intercept only your message. So if I deleted something here, the reducer is looking at it. It's like, okay, give me that action. And let's see, was it add a country? No. Delete country? Yes. Okay, then do this, right? So that's a pretty cool way of doing stuff. So basically, yeah, if we add a country, what needs to happen is we need to return a new store, new state of our reducer, and that's going to be whatever we have in there, comma, and then countries are changed. Now we are adding something. We are unpacking the current state, countries. So whatever was in countries stays in countries. And by the way, you can unpack arrays just as you can unpack objects. Here is a very good example. Here we unpacked an object because we know it's an object. Is a JS object of key value pair. And what it's going to do, it's going to add those key values here one by one. The same happens here, but with an array. I'm unpacking an array. So instead of saying, hey, first object will be an array, and you can do that. You can say, hey, it's going to be an array. First object will be an array of objects, and then there's going to be a second one. But you don't want to do that. You want to unpack it. So whatever is inside of here, you want to have, if you have like 5 items here, you want to have 5 items inside of this array, comma, another object. But anyway, and so on. So if you have delete, And what's happening exactly in here? Why are we doing this? So let's say we add country. Why are we doing this operation here? Because we want to synchronize, kind of blindly synchronize between the database, the backend, and the front end. Blindly in a way that we don't know for sure that the database changed. So we are not sure that the new item is saved in the database, but we assume by saying, hey, we did here add country, and we said then, you gave me status 200, you did your job, backend, okay? You did your job. So I'm assuming the database has been updated. So now I'm pretty sure that if I change my site, my store, I don't need to make the call for give me all the countries again. Because, to be 100% sure, what I will do here, I'll be like, okay, once you save the new object, now give me the list of all the objects after the save. And that's like 100% sure. But we want to be smart. We want to minimize amount of work. And once we know that, okay, I know that the backend did its job, now me as a front end, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to add to my countries another item. So just keep in mind that sometimes you might not see the sync between these two, and that's what happens. You need to debug that problem. You see that, okay, I'm updating my front end, but then when I refresh, I don't see it anymore. Why it's not there? Okay, so delete the same story. So what we do is we get those countries that we had before. Once you get the status confirming the deletion, what we do is we get the old countries and we say, hey, as long as it's not the the stuff that we deleted, keep it in there. So we filter out the stuff that we deleted. Did we check the database? No, we didn't. We trust that the backend did its work, and now we do our work. We get rid of the stuff that we deleted in here, okay? And this, we just check what is the state of countries, and we just put it there that we did just a second ago. So let's just change country list a little bit. Let me just, again, copy the whole snippet and tell you what changed here. So let me just select everything. So what you need to do is you need to add that delete country, right? So it's not just get countries anymore. We also want to delete in the list, okay? It's one component that is doing two things. When it gets mounted, it gets the countries and lists them, and then you can delete them as well. Set the prop types. So both of them are functions and they're both required. That doesn't change. Here we add an empty header, and in here there's going to be like a delete button. It's a very lazy work on my part. It's not even a button, it's just text that on click it's going to do its work. I'm just showing you functionality. I'm not trying to be fancy here. This stays the same. We're just getting countries from the store, and in here we are connecting and we're adding this delete country. So not only we have the state, not only we have get countries, and we can use it like this .props.get countries, we also can use delete. So this .props.delete country. And what is this part? So bind. Why do we bind? It's because we are tapping into this component. We need to keep this information in that component, in that action. So we do .bind, we pass this, and then we send an ISO code that we want to delete. And then it's being deleted because we send it to the action. And in here, we send that here, right? That's why, let me go here. We pass that argument here. It goes here, and it's being used in our function, okay? So that's it. So if I save and see, okay, successfully compiled, we already have the delete in here. So let me delete some of my test items, and boom, gone. Abba is gone, right? And as you can see here, the history shows that there was a change, and we deleted ISO code AD. Cool, okay? So the delete works, and by the way, so that's what I was talking about. We filtered it out from our list in the front end. Did the database take? Let me refresh. Yes, it did, because we did the database, we did the backend well, and it works. So the both parts, backend and front end, did their own job on its own, but there was a bit of a communication there. Backend said, I'm finished, I done my deletion, now you update yourself, and everything went well. Oh, sorry. So let's just go here. So the last bit is the new component air pollution, and here's going to be a add component, new CountryAdd, and let me copy my snippet again. Okay, so that's typical React stuff. Connect we talked about, prop types we talked about. We're getting this add country from actions. Okay, so one of the actions in this component will be add country. And we have our state. So as I mentioned before, in CountryList, we don't have a state. That's why you don't see it here. But here we need to keep tabs of what's going on with our state, at country state. We have ISO code, name, color, longitude, latitude, altitude for the country. So we need to have it in our state. Prop types, we only have at country. We are not getting any stuff from the store, from the Redux store. So all we have to declare in here is the at country, that is a function. OnChange, so this is very handy. OnChange, and whenever something changes, so that's our event, and what we want to do is, hey, and this state is not Redux related. This is pure React here. What I want to do is whenever something changes that uses onChange, and you'll see here that onChange, whatever happens is get the name of the target, that name here, and only change the name of the target. Let's say this ISO code or name, right? We have ISO code and name in here. So all we say is, hey, change the state the way that the rest is the same, except for, let's say, ISO code that's going to have the value of that field, of that event target. Okay. So, and that's pretty cool because you don't have to have a change function for each of these fields. What they do is they check the name of the field that we change, and we just in one liner, we do the change of the state, which is pretty cool. And on submit, so in here we have to specify what's going to happen when we hit that submit button. First, we need to prevent the default submission because we want to do the Ajax call here. And so here we are unpacking this state. We are just taking those values. So we want to have ISO code, name, color, longitude, latitude, altitude. If we had some more information in this state, that's how we filter it out. We don't want anything else. Right now, it's the full state, I know. But if you had, like, I don't know, user logged in, whatever you want to keep in here, you can still have it in your state, which is a good thing to keep your state still available for other stuff than just the form, basically. This is the add form. And then we create an object here of these items. So by doing these two lines, I'm getting all the information I need from the state, and then I pack it in a new object called country. Okay. And then what I do is I send add country with that country. I'm calling this function here with the country, and I send that in post and do the rest. And I'm using that because I have an access to it here. I import it and then I connect it here. Okay, that's how I can use this.props.addCountry. And then obviously once that's done, I want to set state to the beginning. So to the initial, basically. Okay, and let's have a look here in render. Now here again, we are deconstructing this state using this notation. So we just want to grab ISO code, name, color, and so on, used in the form, so we can put that in the value, right? And so all that has to happen, let me see here, form on submit. So we're using this on submit function that we specified here that does a pretty standard thing that we were just talking about a second ago. And every field has its own on change attached to it and its own value. So it has to have that name that corresponds to the name in the state, which is important if you want to use this function here, and you don't want to have on change for each of these fields. Okay, so, and as you can see here, we have ISO code, and ISO code here, the same name, color, longitude, and so on, right? And we just change the type from text to number because longitude, latitude, and altitude are numbers. But then all we have to put in here is a submit button, right? And that's our form. And then we just close that form. That's the end of our component. And what's going on here? If you look at CountryList, we had something called map state to props. And by the way, you can call it whatever you want as long as you pass it with the same name. As far as I know, you can try that. In here, we're passing null because what happens is we don't need any information from the store, from Redux and any reducers. So we are not getting any information from anywhere. And by the way, we could, if we had an access to this the same way, we could, for example, check something in our fields. And if you wanted to have like a front end validator, you could implement it. You could say, hey, this has to be unique. So once you hit that first key, it checks if it exists in our already existing country list. If it's there, you can give the user a very quick feedback saying, sorry, that already exists. Even if the person is still typing, You know, you can say like, no, 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 oh yes, now because you added one more character, I couldn't find the whole thing, and now you're fine. All I'm saying is in here, we're actually not doing it. We're not tapping into the store, and that's why we can just pass null. And if we want to add some functions, actions here, that's how you do it. And we have our CountryAdd, and that's it. So let me see, let me just go here and add that import CountryAdd, and again, PyCharm helped me a little bit here, and let me just add that here. So CountryAdd, and again, we're not passing any props in here, and let's save it, see if it's successfully built. I don't know if it was now, but let me refresh, and it's here. As I said, the styling is not here, although I did kind of try to use Bootstrap. As you can see, form group, blah, 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 that's a bootstrappy stuff. But it's all about the functionality. All I just wanted to show you is that if now I'm gonna do, I can see you're missing a bit of my screen, I need to fix that. Let's see, let's add ZX. Name is gonna be ZX country, and the color will be all black, and we're gonna put this float, and maybe 0, and maybe 5. Submit. Seems like it worked. We have a history here. Country, add country. We did call this, we dispatched this message basically, and that's how it changed. We added new country, and it's called ZX name, right? So if you go back to the beginning, get countries, that was the state. We got a new list of all the countries. After this step, we got a new one here, and we added it at the very end because, as I said before, in the reducer, once we called add country, we added that here by doing this. Whatever state was there, and then we just modify countries, we unpack what we had, and we add one more. And it's here. And if I refresh, it seems like the backend did its job as well. So after the refresh, we still have that entry. Let me delete it and refresh again. It's gone. So it seems like the front end and back end work well, but look at the speed of it. Let me add that again. So no. And boom, it's done. I didn't have to wait for refresh, reload. My browser and my computer basically didn't have to re-render everything. We just checked the difference and we added that there. The form is empty again. I'm ready to add, I don't know, ZC. I'm using Z because it seems like there's nothing with Z at the beginning, and I don't want to, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, ZXC, no, ZC, color, and submit. Boom, it's there. It was so quick. For now, we don't have any errors, so let me just try to add ZX again, submit. Something kind of worked, because what we said in here is whenever you submit, restart, just clean the slate, do this. But since we got an error message from the backend, let me go to console, 400, bad request. We already have that, but we don't do any error handling. All we have is this console log here with the error, but it works, right? And let me refresh. We still have our ZXZC. Let me delete this, done, gone. And it's so quick. Okay, so there you have it. I know it was a pretty long video, but I just wanted to go through the 3 basic operations in our actions. So now we know how to add, so basically post stuff with some information. We know how to delete, so using the delete with the code, or the PK basically. We know how to get. We didn't get the detail, but it's basically the same as delete. So we add a PK in here, and we just add that PK here, and we do get instead of delete. But that would do exactly the same thing. We just have to create a new type called get country, one country, and then the payload will be the same. We just send back the whatever JSON with that country in the payload, and there needs to be a reducer that will grab that get country, and it will do something with the state. So it will change whatever state we need to, let's say we want to have like current country, and we change that current country to whatever we got from there. So anyway, we have nice examples here. Not very useful for now because we don't operate around countries, but I just wanted to use a model that we don't operate around just for examples. And we can just go every time we need something, we can go here and be like, oh, how was this done? Okay, copy and paste. Anyway, in the next video, I don't know if I want to talk about errors or authentication. We need to implement both of them. because we have errors. We need to handle errors, and we have authentication as well. So we need to do these, and then we can go and change the bootstrap that is done just in HTML, kind of, very basic bootstrap, into React bootstrap. And that's the most interesting part. And I know it feels like a bit of a cliffhanger here, because you probably want to go there. You want to start building actual front end using bootstrap and React. But be patient. We need to knock off some of the boring stuff, which is error catching, messages, and authentication. Okay, cool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.